evening. Can everybody hear me all right? Yeah? Good. So I'm Brian Germain. You probably figured that one out. So just a little bit about me, just so you kind of know where I'm coming from. One of the things that I do is I'm an author, and I've written a number of books. And one of them is called Transcending Fear, and it relates to it's not specifically a skydiving book. Obviously, I teach skydiving, advanced stuff, and I found that the fundamental limiting factor in somebody's performance is how they relate to their fear. How do they deal with their adrenaline? And I found that people that could not control their adrenaline had more problems. And I figured, well, obviously I need to teach them parachute aerodynamics. I need to teach them hard science stuff that saves their butt. Nevertheless, if we don't kind of deal with the emotional aspect of who we are, we're missing half of the equation. At least half of the equation, maybe even more. So, just a little bit about me. I've jumped out of airplanes over 13,000 times. I've been doing it for a while, about 23 years. And a number of years ago, I won the X Games, which has given me the opportunity to do a lot of teaching all over the planet. So every week, I'm in a different place, in many cases, a different country, teaching this stuff. And I did go to school for psychology, undergrad and grad school. So when I get into a little bit of the psych stuff, it's not totally out of my butt. So some of it is. So let's start off with the general idea of fear. I mean, we have physiological stuff, and you guys are trained in that aspect of it. Immediately comes to mind several different physiological processes that gear the body up to act, correct? So I would simplify it, though, for the sake of this discussion, into two general categories of action, things that I have discovered as a skydiving instructor. What tends to happen when people get their adrenaline up into the red zone, the red line? The first set of possibilities is intense overreaction. Hyperactivity. It might just be simple nervous energy. You ever notice your knees tapping when you're getting ready to take an exam, or during the exam, or through the entire exam? Right? Extra energy that's in our bodies. The other part, and the other, I guess I should say, in the higher realms of it, we start to see a different possible scenario. Intense underreaction. People don't always pull their ripcords. Fortunately, we have automatic openers now, and so the parachute comes out all by itself. But then you look at the situation afterwards and go, why? I mean, it's a big planet. It's really obvious. Why doesn't somebody look down and go, wow, it's time to open the parachute? There's all kinds of cues, visual, temperature cues. It gets warmer. You know that the planet's there, and yet they are tuned out. Or they have a malfunction, the parachute is clearly not working, and they don't cut it away and open the reserve. Why do they freeze? And so to really answer these questions, we need to go deeper, I think. We need to look at where fear comes from an evolutionary standpoint. It's an emotional response, which is physiological and cognitive, but it's based on a perceived threat, right? It's not always a physical threat. A train is about to hit you and you get the adrenaline and you jump out of the way with tremendous force. That's coming from your limbic system, right? Saying, go, right? But the perceived threat could be an exam. It could be performance anxiety. You're about to give a talk in front of a bunch of med students. How do you deal with the excess adrenaline? You're all going to be dealing with that in your career. And some of it's just going to be dealing with crises, things that are happening. The lady's having a baby. You can't push the pause button on it so much. And so there's going to be adrenaline. There's going to be intense stress. And I'd have to say that your limbic system doesn't know the difference between that kind of stressor and what I deal with when I'm test jumping an experimental parachute that I built in my basement. I do it all the time. The truth is that the brain structures don't see a difference. There's a cognitive appraisal where I weigh out my perceived ability against my perceived risk, And if I feel out of balance with that, in other words, my perceived ability is low for a risk that I consider to be really intense, very real, I'm going to have a fear response. Of course, what I do with that is up to me. We can become skilled in dealing with our adrenaline. So to go even deeper, this physiological arousal is getting us ready to, I'm having a little trouble with my clicker, sorry, basic survival instincts. Our genes have behaviors encoded in them. Some of them are the need to breathe. Some of them are the need to eat. Some of them are escape danger, survive. Exactly how that works, I don't know that anybody can say absolutely, but we do know that it seems to be the case that there are stereotypical behavior patterns that are intended to increase the chances of an animal being able to live long enough to breed, right? That's what it's all about. You don't pass on your genes come to a dead end. So when we find ourselves in a situation where there's perceived danger, our first instinct is generally to hold still, to do nothing. Because action might precipitate something that we don't want. Take the predator and prey relationship that exists in nature at all times. If the prey runs away, they have lost their ability to hide. And so the predator has their trigger go on, right, because of the movement, the retreat, and so now there is an attack as a result of the retreat. And so freezing is our first line of defense. The problem is, freezing is not always a good thing, especially when it comes to the point where it's post-traumatic stress disorder, people are no longer functional, we don't make choices when we need to make choices, we don't get off our asses and study when we need to study because we're scared to even think about the upcoming exam. Laziness comes from it too. Disengaging. And it is now believed that the freezing instinct is not just a short-circuiting in the brain that goes, I have too much juice in my body. That maybe the freezing instinct is actually coming from something a little bit more valuable to the species, at least traditionally. It's just that our old defense mechanisms don't necessarily apply. We're trying to ram a square peg into a round hole in modern society. The basic actions that get us out of dangerous situations traditionally were run away. If you got wings, fly away. If you got a flagella, you flap it like crazy and get out of Dodge, right? Whatever you need to do to escape the danger. The other one is you attack. Force against force. The emotion of anger stems from this. So fear and anger are not different. It's just a different evolution of it. When people are driving down the road scared that they're going to be late for work, if you really strip away the anger and you really think about what's going on, they're just afraid to be late. And so now, and then they pull out the Magnum and start shooting holes in somebody's car. We have a problem in our society with anger. It's not a terribly productive emotion unless you're trying to kill a bear that is trying to kill you. We don't run into that very often anymore. At least I don't. I don't know about you guys. So we have these basic primal instincts built in. And when the adrenaline gets up above a certain level, we start to see significant changes in the cognitions that occur to us and the behavior patterns that come out. And they're generally not terribly beneficial. So I think that in order to really understand that stuff and how to diminish that, to keep us away from the red line, we have to do a brief review of what goes on in the brain, right? The amygdala. It's the watchdog in the brain, old brain structure. Been around for a while. Before we were clever, before we were making tools, we had amygdalas. And so that amygdala goes, something's going on. There's danger. I am threatened. And I need to do something about it. And it sends a whole cascading of events. And you guys can explain this probably way better than I do. Maybe not the first years. There is a hostile takeover of the brain.